Welcome to another Third Coast Nerds podcast. You know how this goes by now.
I was wondering if you had another one ready.
Yeah, it's a rough thing. We talked about it just on the NerdFit podcast. That it's kind of the end of an era because it's been fun doing them, but it's not fun when you're not as engaged and creative with making these little one-liners to make the computer voice say.
Right.
And then fighting with it almost every week to be like, no, pronounce this differently. And plus, the voice website's getting problematic, so that's a lot of issues too.
Right.
So I have to pick something that's going to be the permanent intro. Maybe. I don't know yet.
Yeah. Well, I gave you some advice on the last one.
Yeah.
Go to Fiverr, find you a voice actor, see what they'll do. Maybe you'll find something great, maybe not. But $5 is $5.
It's $5. It's
Yeah,
$5. Again,
exactly.
that's the second ad for Fiverr that we're not getting paid for.
Hey. What can I say?
There's a lot of websites that do the same thing too, logo design and things like that, graphic design.
Even Mechanical Turk out there that Amazon does is that whole thing.
Yeah.
So anyway,
so it's when this show is released, it will be the day before Tabletop Day.
Yep, Tabletop Day is on Saturday.
Yeah, I have not participated in one of these before.
Oh well, I don't know how long it's been going on, but I know that it's really kind of taken off in the last few years, ever since.
It's America, and there's an international whatever day.
Oh well,
every day
yeah,
of the week.
Yeah, basically. But tabletop is a thing I've taken seriously for a long time, and I didn't know there was a thing for it, or a day for it, or stuff that would happen on a particular time on the calendar about this hobby I have until just the last 4 or 5 years. I have a sneaking suspicion that. We've been in the golden age of board games for quite a while now, but it's really taken off in the last few, and I think a lot of that has to do with the tabletop web show that's on Geek and Sundry.
Mm-hmm.
New episodes are out. I'm about 3 behind, but I find so much good wish list stuff out of that show.
Yeah.
And they do, you do promos, your friendly neighborhood game store, which if you're out there and you know of one, you should probably go there on Saturday. They'll be giving stuff away. There will be piles of people there. There's probably a sale on. And those guys are struggling since they have to compete with Amazon and all that jazz. So get out and support your friendly neighborhood game shop. You should do that. It's a good idea. But sales, free swag, can't hurt. If you actually have games already, you can generally get promo stuff for them that you can't get any other time. Like have you ever played Smash Up?
No.
Okay, so the idea behind Smash Up is there's a bunch of very cliche sort of factions. Like there's the robot faction, and there's the fairies, and then bear riding Russians, and then steampunk, and right. So not last year, maybe it was a couple years ago, they had a geeks faction that you could get to add into that game, and it was like 30 cards. The way that game goes is you take 2 factions and you shuffle them up, and then you have like the robot ninjas, and that is your deck, and you fight against zombie bear riders or whatever. I mean. They have a bunch of
zombie bear riders, right? Yeah. Like riders on the bears.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
There's a rider on the bear. So yeah, that. It's a relatively straightforward game, and it's a good time. But they had a couple of bases for that you'd get in the promo, and then you had a whole faction that you could get, and they had a couple of relatively well-known geeks in it, and then. One of the other games, Seven Wonders? They had an expansion that's all famous leaders. So they added some not so famous leaders. Like I think Ray Charles is in there as a famous leader. I don't remember what his effect is, but I mean, they do some fun stuff. You can't just go out and you might be able to get those now, but they were giving them away. I mean. Yeah. There's bound to be something out there that you're interested in that they're handing out some of if you go out for Tabletop Day. And then, like I said, sales, and then, they're usually doing contests and things. There's a pandemic contest that my wife and a friend of ours are playing in where they do a stacked deck, and everybody plays against the deck or plays against the board the same way. Yeah. And so the people who survive all get to go another level into the tournament. And the winner at the game shop that I'll be at, which is 8th Dimension over off of Highway 6. I want to think if you win at that one, you get to go to some other state for the next level. I mean, there's not a whole lot of people that are playing this. So if you have an interest, get out there and get in it, right?
Come see me.
Don't come see me. I don't like people. But go out and support the hobby. I mean, as I said, golden age of board games. If you have any interests at all, or if you like playing even with just a few people, there's a lot of great options out there for board games, and there's no better time to find out what it is without having to buy it than now.
Yeah.
Because that, there were many times I'd walked into like Nan's downtown. It's the big gaming shop that's been there forever. And, I do tabletop role play. So I'd be like, I need a fresh set of dice because I'm rolling all lousy on the ones I've got. So I'd go in there and I'd buy dice and figurines. And they had like this whole section that was all board games. But I don't know what any of these are. I don't know if they're worth playing. I don't know if they're balanced. I don't know if they're, my luck is terrible.
Yeah.
So I like games with a high strategy component. I'm not against luck entirely, but I got to be able to, stack the deck in my favor, as it were. Hence the deck building games.
Yeah.
So I like games with a high strategy contingent, and I don't want to play Candyland where it's like, did you roll the things you needed? You win. That's just not my kind of game. And so I hate to open a game and go, oh, this is all. Can you draw the card you need?
Yeah.
Shit. So, the fact that there's shows out there like Tabletop and other things out there that are like, hey, this is how this game is played, and you can kind of get a feel for what it looks like and so on. This is a great time to be someone who wants to play Tabletop. So, yeah, make best use of it. As I said, I find all sorts of wish list sort of stuff on the Tabletop show. I actually came in here with the idea of talking about games for larger groups.
Yeah.
Because
it's a problem we've had. So I recently went over to one of Kyle's game nights. They already had 6 folks there. I was the 7th man, and that means a lot of people, you're going to have a lot of rounds. Almost every round of a game that's going to come up for the rest of the night is going to have one odd man out that's not going to get to participate unless you somehow house hack the rules to death.
Or you have the right games.
You have the right
I
game.
have some suggestions for you, sir. Truly, I do.
The John Gauntlet of Truth.
No, not even that. It's just I've got a pretty wide collection of games at this point, and I've run into this same problem.
Yeah.
Usually the breakover point's at about 6, right?
Yeah.
Because there's some games that go to 5, and a lot of the ones that scale for 5 don't scale real well when they get to 5. And then there's a few games that are designed for 6, like Dominion will go to 6, but you don't want to play Dominion with 6. I don't recommend it at all. It just doesn't scale well. It's too long between turns and so on.
Yeah.
So, but there's games that are built and really scale pretty well. Like they've actually got the balance set, and it works out pretty well for larger groups. And I've got a few I can suggest to you.
Okay.
So you mentioned 7. I can think of 2 games right off the top of my head that will take 7 and not even flinch. I think you even own one of these. It's called, or maybe you've heard of it at least. It's called 7 Wonders.
Yeah, I have that.
Yeah, you own that one.
Yeah.
So it's a drafting game,
Mm-hmm.
right? So basically, you dole up the cards, and there's 3 ages. In each age, you start with a hand of 7 cards, and you go, I'm going to build this card into my civilization. And you have some resources. So each card, most of them have a cost. You have to have the resources to build the thing you're trying to build. And you can buy resources from your neighbors for a nominal fee. And so, but this game will take up to 7 because there's 7 ancient wonders. And really, you only interact with your immediate neighbors, but the way that the game works is you take a card, you pick it and kind of put it off to the side, and then everybody reveals what they're building at once. And then you take that hand and you pass it to the left.
Mm-hmm.
And you get a new hand of whatever your neighbor had that they didn't build. And then you build from there, and then you pass and you build and you pass and you build. And so sometimes, depending on how many people are in the game and so on, you might see the same hand again, and other times you might not. So you got to make some very picky decisions, and you have kind of an idea after you've played a few times of what's in a given age, so you know what to build. And then some of these buildings, as you build them, like they chain.
Mm-hmm.
So if you build an altar in the next age, you can build the temple for free. But you got to have the altar built to build it for free. If you want to build the temple without having built the altar, you got to pay a whole bunch of resources. So
Yeah.
if you play the long game, you can really strategize in. But it also kind of depends on what your neighbors are building, because you can use some of their resources. So you're like, well, I need a bunch of stone to build the Great Pyramid of Giza because that's your wonder. And so you're like, I need 4 stone to build the last stage of that. I only have 2, but he's got 1 and he's got 1. So I can build and use one of his and use one of his, and just I have to give up a little money, but I can make it work.
Yeah.
And it's worth it for the victory. And then you can go, hey, this guy to the left that I'm fixing to pass this hand to, there's nothing in here I really want, but he really wants this card, like so bad. So I'm going to take that one and build it into my wonder. and he'll never see that it got built anywhere. It just won't be in any of the hands he ever gets.
Yeah.
You can hate draft so great with your wonder. It's glorious. There's a slightly more complex version where you play the B sides of the wonder, and they all have a weird special ability. Like one of them will let you build 2 cards in one turn, which is kind of powerful. One of them will let you build from the stuff other people have thrown away without paying for it once an age, which is super powerful. The game's got a bunch of expansions. I think with the expansions, it'll go up to 9 or 10 players, but it scales extremely well as long as you're playing with at least 3.
Yeah.
It has a dual version, but the way the base game is built, dueling doesn't work out real well. Basically, you have a ghost third player that you each taking turns for. It's wonky and off balance. There's a 2-player version you can buy separately if you only play with one other person. But if you're 3 to 7 or 3 to 10, 7 Wonders is a great one. It's pretty easy to pick up. It's not super easy. I'm not going to tell you it's a real easy one to pick up. It can be a little complex, but after you've played a couple of rounds, it kind of starts to gel, and it scales really well.
That's one of the reasons why I actually have not played my own copy of this game. I've only played it with you and your wife. So I've only played it however many rounds we played that night. Which
we played twice.
Yeah, so twice, which is not. I have to look in the rule books to understand the scoring, because I was completely lost on the scoring whenever we played.
So the scoring on it's pretty straightforward, except for science. Science is weirdly calculated in that game.
Yeah,
because you got 3 symbols for science, and the way you score science is if you have one of each symbol, like a set of all 3, it's 7 points, and then for each symbol you get the square of however many of them you've got. Which, when you start adding exponents and if calculating scores, things get weird fast, right? So, and then you got a few cards that are like, pick one of the symbols. So you're like, well, do I want to get the 4th of this symbol, which would take it from being 9 points to 16, or do I want to complete another set? Well, it just kind of depends on how many you've got. And do the math. Yeah, science. That one's the toughest way to score points, but if you can commit, you can get ludicrous points building science.
Yeah.
But there's buildings that are only in the game as the game goes up. Like the way the decks are split, they all have a little thing at the bottom that says like 3+, 4+, 5+.
Yeah.
So you only get some buildings when you have a really big group of people, and some of those buildings are ludicrously powerful, and they give you some extra options that just aren't there when you're playing with a smaller group. So it scales really well. And it'll take any number and be fairly accommodating about it. So, yeah, great pick if you got.
It was a great game.
If you need something that scales really well, and you're not always a big group, but you're often a big group, and it's also one that it's strategy, but there is enough of a luck component that it's, hey, my neighbor did exactly what I happened to need. He didn't know what I was going for, but he had exactly the stuff I wanted.
Yeah.
And you can make things work there. I got an expansion for it recently that adds some other mechanics. Those make it a little more complicated, but 7 Wonders is great. Another one that's great for 7 people, and this one's got an added feature, which I'll explain in a minute. There's an episode of Tabletop about this one. It's called Shadows over Camelot.
Okay.
So it's exactly what it sounds like in that it's about the Knights of the Round Table. So at the beginning of the game, everybody gets past one of the Knights of the Round Table, and it's, King Arthur and Gawain the Green Knight and Sir Kay and so on. And they each have a special ability. And the whole idea is you're trying to keep Camelot from decaying into nothing. And you have a bunch of fronts where you're trying to fix Camelot. Like, you have to go and quest for the Grail. You also have to go and fight Lancelot. And then once you've tangled with Lancelot, there's a dragon. And then there's a place where you have to go to a joust. And then there's 2 fronts where the Picts are trying to invade and the Saxons are trying to invade. And then you also have to go get Excalibur out from the Lady of the Lake. So there's like 5 or 6. Oh, and siege engines keep accumulating around Camelot. And so you have to fight those off or find. And the beginning of the turn, this is another one of those games where it's basically everybody against the board.
Yeah.
At the beginning of the turn, the board does something mean, and you actually get to choose what it is. You can either put a siege engine in front of Camelot. When you hit X number of those, the game's over. Or you can draw a black card, and the black cards are uniformly bad. They basically make any one of the other quests out there harder in some fashion. Either they move the Grail harder, they make it harder to get. They move Excalibur away from the shore, or one of the Picts will show up on the battlefront, or something like that will happen. Or you'll power up Lancelot, or you'll power up the dragon, or whatever. And so it's just this relentless crush of evil trying to grind down Camelot. Now, I've never won this game.
Okay.
We've had a few where we've done pretty well. The idea is you have 14 positions around the round table, and each time you complete a quest, you get to put a certain number of white swords there. If at the end of the game you have at least 7 white swords, you win.
Okay.
If it's black swords, you lose. If Camelot gets destroyed by siege engines, you lose. All sorts of ways to lose.
So it's a large scale multiplayer game that's cooperative.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Sort of.
Kind of, sort of.
So there's a card.
You can kick your friend down the stairs.
Yes.
To see there's a trap.
You can. Because there's a card you get at the beginning, and we've never played with this because I refuse to until I've won this at least once. There's a card you get at the beginning that determines whether you're loyal or a traitor.
Nice.
So there's somebody who could be working for the other team, but you don't even know who it is. A lot of the stuff you do in this game, you have the option of doing it secretly, and you get a benefit for doing it secretly, whether you're evil or not.
Yeah.
But the benefit of doing it secretly, if you're evil, is no one can tell that you've just screwed everybody over. So if you're the traitor, you have to act in a way that looks like you're trying to help, but totally screw over everybody else. And because you have this everybody versus the board, but maybe not everybody versus the board potential mechanic, it could really get interesting, especially if you play somebody who's going to play their duplicity to the hilt.
Yeah.
Like you run with Neil. I could totally see Neil as an extremely effective traitor in a game like this one.
Nah.
Yeah.
No.
Well, and you know it from the get-go too.
Yeah.
So like when you get the card at the front, you're like, all right, so how am I going to trip these guys up in a way that doesn't get me found out? Because if you get found out, you lose some of the usefulness of being the traitor. Like people know you're the asshole, and they're going to not cooperate with you. But, everybody assumes you're on the same team, or they might assume you're on the same team. So they're like, we're going to give this guy the resources so he can go finish that quest that we all need in order to survive. Nope. So there's all sorts of options there.
We run with a lot of people in this 3CN circle that are well suited for that role.
Yeah. As I said, though,
it gets tricky on game nights with a lot of these people.
Yeah, not doing it till I've won that at least once.
Yeah.
But that one would be a good one. I think Neil should get a look at that, if only because somebody needs to do the math on how to make that thing work. I haven't won that fucker yet. And I've been using the guys with some of the more powerful special abilities. Like you can look at the top card of the evil deck and determine whether you want to do that or not. It's like, oh, that's really bad. Let's not do that at all if we can avoid it. That's
like Dominion and stacking your opponent's deck with a bunch of cards.
Right.
That are bad.
Yeah.
Not you. Yeah.
Well, these are uniformly bad. It's just bad in what direction and how bad is really what it is. But yeah, man, that one's a good time. It's very multifaceted. Like you almost have to split up in order to try and tackle everything, but at the same time, you have to, in order to accomplish anything, you're going to have to focus at least 2 or 3 people on a given task at a time and complete them. But the thing is every time you complete a task, all the stuff that would wrong that task wrongs something else instead.
Yeah.
So it all builds up. The more holes you plug, the more the ones that are still leaking are going to leak on you. So it's an interesting game. As I said, I haven't won it yet, but I've only played it 4 or 5 times. It's a hard one to talk people into.
Yeah.
But it's a good time. But those, as I said, are they're aimed at 7 people. Like that's the roof for those 2.
Yeah.
If you want more than that, I've got a couple of others you could play. Are you big on team games?
Sure.
Okay. So you might enjoy this one, if only because it involves an interesting turn of mind, and it will allow you to make some interesting references. So it's a game called Concept. And the whole idea behind it is it's sort of like win, lose, or draw without the drawing.
Okay.
The idea is you've got this giant board, and it's got a bunch of little icons on it. And there's an icon that's like a picture of like people in weird costumes, and it's supposed to mean like mythical. And then there's another one that's like the number 0 and the number 1, and then there's a bunch of colors down one side, and then there's a bunch of like concepts, like abstract or writing or film or whatnot. And so you have an idea that you got to try and get across using this board. And so you get an idea, like the one I always use as an example is Calvin and Hobbes, right? So if you were going to explain Calvin and Hobbes to someone, and you could only do it via very minute pieces of concept, how would you get it across? Well, you might go, well, you have like one main concept and then a bunch of sub concepts you can use to try and get it across. So the main concept would be like comic book, and then it would be a comic book about a young boy, right? And then an animal. So that would be the way you'd get across the main idea, right? It's a comic book about a boy and an animal, and then you're like, all right. So the sub-concept, you'd put the main sub-concept as the boy, and you'd say it's a young boy and he wears red and black because that's the shirt.
Yeah.
And then you'd be like, and for the animal, it's orange and black, and so you're like, okay, so it's an orange and black animal and a little kid. And so you might be able to go, okay, so yeah, that could be Calvin and Hobbes, or you might do the other things you could say about Calvin and Hobbes. That he's got the teacher that he doesn't get along with, so you might say there's a bit of it that's about school, and he's got the neighbor girl that he doesn't get along with, and so you could refer to that. There's any number of ways you can break something down like that, and some of these get to be really like tricky concepts that you can try and get across with all this, and they have different point ratings, and so the more complicated stuff you try and get across is worth more points. Like my wife, one of the things she had to try and get across was at some point was the song, the old folk song, "This Land Is Your Land."
Really?
Yeah.
How did that work out?
I got it. It took her a couple of minutes, but I got there.
Is it one of those things like you get to keep trying it until someone gets it?
Yeah, absolutely. And you can kind of like, you can't talk for obvious reasons because you would just be like, it's this. But,
yeah.
But what you can do is kind of like, you have these little markers that are color coded. So like for the main concept, if there's a whole bunch of people, you might put a whole bunch of that color marker on there, and you can like emphasize things by like, I had to do dragonfly, right? So
okay.
I did animal and mythical. So I'm like, first of all, I did animal, and then I did mythical animal, and then like the ability to fly. Because I think there was a plane on there or something that says something about flight. So I'm like, so mythical animal, and I got across for the mythical animal. I did like fire because the dragons breathe fire and it's got wings, and they're like, so dragon. I'm like gesticulating wildly, like yes, there's that, and then so I'm like, so dragon, and then I pointed to the fly, and they're like dragon plane. I'm like, no, dragon, the flying dragon. I'm like, you're so close. Right, but stuff like that, and you get some really just off the wall ways people try to get things across, and it's an interesting game to play, especially if you got people with kind of a weird turn of mind, or people that are good about breaking things down into their components, which is the part of it that I think would appeal to you.
I would pay money to see Rand play this game.
Right,
it's like clearly you have not. But the thing, it's purple and. Idiot.
Right. In much the same vein, have you ever played Codenames?
No, but I have observed the game in action.
Similar-ish idea, right? You give the hints, and this is another one that it's a team game, and you can take 5 or 10 people on either team.
Yeah.
And as long as you can at least kind of arrive at a consensus about which words you're going to pick, you can make that work. But it's a good time if you haven't played Codenames. We only acquired it recently, and I induced some marital strife playing that game. I understood what my wife was getting to only after she explained it to me. I'm like, what? That's 3 steps farther than I would have tried to go, explaining what you just tried to get me to. I think the word we were trying to get to was red, and her clue for it was Irish. And I'm like, I would associate Irish with green. And she goes, yeah, but, people there's a red thing. I'm like, I get that.
Yeah.
But that wasn't where I would have gone with that.
The Fighting Irish is the first thing that immediately comes to mind, and that's all about green and, shamrocks and everything else.
Right. But, the Irish are known for the red hair. And
yeah, well.
And people that are from Ireland are often called red because they tend to be kind of ruddy complected. And anyway. Yeah, so she had a rationale, and after she explained it, I understood.
Yeah.
And there wasn't anything wrong with it, except it was way deeper than I expected to try and go.
What's the bit? It's a little bit like Sheldon in Big Bang Theory. You trying to play Pictionary?
I don't know that I saw that episode.
It was so off the rails. I can't remember what the clue was, but maybe I'll try to look it up here in a second. But it was just so down this weird rabbit hole of association that you just couldn't There's no way you could get it.
Well, so the thing is you want to try and give a hint that will give as many of the code words at once as you can without giving any words that are not what you're trying to get across, right? So when you can give something that's vague enough, you can get 2 or 3 things at a time. That's the way you want to go.
Yeah.
And so she was trying to pick something where she could get, there was something else on there that was, I think it was spring was the other one. So she's like, Irish. And you'll do spring and red. And I'm like, spring? Yeah, I totally got you. Red? Not so much. Not so much.
Like, oh, God, it's got the spring soap.
Yeah. So
it's not made out of flowers or lemon. It's made out of sand and gravel.
So yeah, that one's a good time. Just understand that not everybody's going to think along the same lines. We played that with my in-laws, and there was a certain amount of what going on.
Yeah. So yeah, the Pictionary topic for Sheldon was Higgs boson. And it was. I wish I could find. I can't play the clip, which is unfortunate because freaking copyright fair use, you sons of bitches.
Tell us how you really feel, Chad.
I wish I could find the transcript. Not to break your train of thought here, but it's one of those things where it's going to annoy me until I find it.
Right.
But
no worries.
It was pigs. So there was an equation. There was hydrogen plus pigs, pigs minus P, a picture of a cat with a bow, General Zod trapped in the Phantom Zone, pair plus particle.
Yeah.
Is supposed to be the Higgs boson particle.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. that's complicated.
But yeah, pair plus tickle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pair tickle. Yeah. I mean, I again, in retrospect, if you know what you're going for, this makes sense. If you don't, you're like, what on the bloody hell? Yeah, and there was a fair amount of that, and as I said, a little marital strife there. I don't recommend it, ladies and gentlemen. When you play games with your significant other, understand what you're getting into, right? Especially if you're the competitive types.
Yeah.
So, just remember to take it with a grain of salt.
I have never finished a game of Monopoly in my life, and I never took a worse beating than with my first significant the O2.
Right.
02, 01, somewhere around there. Somewhere in that. I've slept since then. So yeah, with that one, she was extremely good at Monopoly. And it got to the point where almost half the board is owned by her.
Oh, yeah. Even
in like a 4-player, 5-player game. And just no one would engage with Monopoly with her ever.
Yeah. I have a...
It's a bad time.
I had a reputation about that game there for a bit. When I was a Boy Scout for many years, and summer camp was a thing that would happen every year.
Mm-hmm.
And what would happen is, at one of the little picnic tables, somebody would have a Monopoly board, and it was one with 1,000 miles on it. And people would be playing Monopoly, and then they're like, "Oh shit, merit badge class!" And so they would get up, and someone else would like duck in and take their place. And so one of the guys that was there at the camp he played a fair amount of Monopoly. I just don't know if he was not budgeting his time properly or what. But he noticed that every time I would show up in one of those games, regardless of whose position I took over for, by the time that game was over, I owned the board.
Yeah,
and he's like,
so you were the ringer.
Yeah, he's like, how are you doing that? I'm like, you just got to, buy the right stuff and, wheel and deal with people. And he's like, I'm going to beat you. And I'm like, no, you're not. And so at the end of the week, he hadn't. The next year, he got with the leaders, and you put 2 guys to a tent. So he arranged to be my tent partner and showed up with a still wrapped Monopoly box. And he's like, before the end of this week, I'm going to beat you at this game. And I'm like, I guess we'll see.
God, man, that's a little obsessed.
Yeah, a bit.
A little obsessed, a little intense.
And this is a year later, so
yeah.
I'm a little creeped out a bit. But I'm like, I'll enjoy thrashing you. So I believe camp started on Monday. I don't think he got a win in or even close to one until like Thursday.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, people don't always play by the correct rules in that game. There's one where if you decide not to buy it at street price, it goes on auction.
Yeah.
You can get some screaming deals that way, but not everybody uses that rule. My big deal is I'm more than happy to pay you $1,000 for a $150 property because I understand the use of some of those properties.
Yeah.
So it's like the little light blue ones on that.
Do you play the
front
percentages? The percentages of landing on those?
No, not consciously. I've played enough that I know, like, okay, so the ones that are towards the end of the side where you come out of jail,
Yeah.
2 of the doubles that'll get you out of jail will put you in those properties. I'm buying those. Because jail's one of the few places where you don't pay rent, so you want to go there.
Cold-blooded, man.
Right.
Cold-blooded.
But, I mean, those are the sort of things that you think of. And so it's like I always tried to own those. I always tried to own the stuff right in front of jail for the same reason, because you either land on those or you land on the stuff just past jail. I always wanted the railroads because it was a footprint on every side. It was a place you could land and not have to pay some other person rent.
Yeah.
You know, so I'd pay people like $900 for a railroad, and they're like, dude, there's only one owned railroad. And I'm like, yes, but I own it. And then the next one would come up, and they're like, oh, well, I guess you can just buy that one at the regular price. I'm like, yes, I can. And then after I get the third one, they're like, oh, shit. And I'm like, yeah. Now you understand the third time you've paid me $200 for these railroads, why I paid you $900 at the beginning. Don't you?
Strategery.
Yeah, pretty much. You got to play the long game.
Yeah.
But, yeah, anyway. So, yeah, I crushed some poor guy's spirit back in Boy Scouts. Because I understood Monopoly, and he learned a lot from me. He was able to hold his own towards the end of that week, but he stewed about it for like a year before that happened.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. So.
What about other games? What's the limit? I mean, there has to be a limit to what size of a game you want to engage in.
It all depends on the game, right? So something like Concept, where you're playing on teams, you probably still don't want more than 10 people.
Yeah.
Right? Just because it gets unwieldy and so on, you're going to have people shouting. And inevitably, there's someone whose turn it isn't, and they don't feel engaged, and that's never a good time for the people playing the game if they're not engaged, right?
Yeah. So
10 is usually the upper limit, but most games only cap at 4 to 6, and there's still some really good ones that you can play that run 7 to 10. You've played Betrayal?
Yes.
Okay, so you did finally get around to that. You were like, so need to play this game.
Yeah. I've got maybe 5-6 rounds of that game in now.
I think that one will go to 6.
It will go to 6. I was misunderstood. I misunderstood. I thought it would go higher than 6. With the expansion, it does not.
Yeah. Widow's Walk. I haven't played the expansion yet. Have you played that at all?
No, I have not.
No. Okay. What'd you think of the game now that you've had the opportunity to play it?
Love it.
Yeah, it's
Love
good
it.
times. It's real good times.
There is a little bit of hack or hack ability that you have to engage with in the game, to where it's kind of like an agreed upon thing. Like we all agree that the haunt's not going to start before like the 5th or 6th omen. It's way too early in the game to get that kicked off.
Well, I mean, statistically, it doesn't anyway.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've actually rolled one where it started, I think, on the 4th.
Yeah, we've had a few where it started on like 3 or 4, and those were really interesting.
Yeah.
Because it really depends on what you get for the haunt on that.
Yeah.
Because some of them it's really advantageous to not have a lot of rooms on the board.
Some of them are cool. The ones that we've run into where the haunt kicked off early, where you're still discovering the house.
Right.
It was not in your favor.
Yeah, you need these rooms in order to be able to finish the haunt.
Yeah.
No,
the
those
game
suck.
the game dragged on. It didn't really go anywhere. The betrayer didn't have anything to do for the longest time until the house developed. So it just dragged on for a long, long time before we could actually
that's unfortunate.
get to the point of the game.
Yeah,
so
that's pretty uncommon, though. Usually,
yeah.
Usually it's like, all right, the haunt shows up, you find out what the haunt is, and the person who's the betrayer is like 6 miles of teeth. They're grinning so high. And you're like, oh, yeah. I'm like, oh, shit. I've been the bad guy a lot of times in that game.
Yeah. So I've my cousin's coming down in the next couple of weeks. We'll probably have a game night, and we'll probably play all these things, because Betrayal was a lot of fun. We actually, I think that's the first time I played that game. Unboxed it with her and my aunt, and we figured it out on the spot because I hadn't had a chance to play it yet.
Yeah, it's not crazy complicated.
Not really.
The fact that there are dice with nothing on some of the sides throws people off.
Yeah. When you roll the dice and you never see anything higher than the dice don't go higher than 2.
Yeah.
So that can throw people off where it's like, what is happening here? Why is this?
Right.
These dice are haunted.
And
There's some ghost dice.
Half of them are blank. I mean,
yeah. Freaking ghost dice.
Yeah.
But yeah, well, speaking of Betrayal, I'm now trying to 3D print a better boxing solution for this thing.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That one could use one.
It doesn't organize well in the box that it comes
No,
in
no, it
at
doesn't.
all.
And in addition to that, the little clippy things that they want you to use on the markers, those kind of
No.
suck. If you find a better solution for that, there's probably a market for it. Yeah.
Thingiverse, I 3D printed new character card holders that have pegs that go into the slots for those counters.
I may need to have you do some of those for me.
They work beautifully. They're great.
Yeah. When you get your storage solution that it would include those worked out,
Yeah.
you let me know.
I'm working around that, but I may redesign those to where instead of having to take
redesign.
Yeah. So the bone stock thing I downloaded for Thingiverse was fantastic, but I think I could do better.
Right.
So it's more of a
Story of my life. That's going to be on your tombstone.
Yeah.
That was a good life, but I think I could do better.
A counter death, not so great. I made some improvements.
Right.
But the character card holder that comes off of Thingiverse has these pegs that you have to take out and move. So I'm working on
like more of a slide,
of a slider thing that clicks into place.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
we're on the
press fit.
same wavelength here.
Yeah.
I get you.
Yeah. So I mean, either way, the way it comes off of Thingiverse, if you have a 3D printer and you're looking for a better way to do this, go to Thingiverse. It's one of the best solutions for it. I think it's called. Just search for Betrayal, and you'll get a whole bunch of solutions for it.
To advertise for Thingiverse in general, if there's a way of doing something other than the way it's currently being done, and you have a 3D printer, that'll at least give you some ideas for approaches if you want to design your own.
For sure. Sure.
I've poked around there a little bit.
Yeah, it wasn't until I actually went to a game night with Chris and Stacy, where we played the game with the new character card holders that I printed out.
Right.
Unfortunately, the pegs they didn't offset the sizing that well. I mean,
so they were tough to pick out.
They stay in there which is kind of the biggest problem with the game is that if you bump the table or bump the character card, you have no idea what it was set to. It's going to move. Yeah. It's going to move very easily. But these pegs, once they're locked down, these things are very difficult to move. So I had to take a small file and file the edges off of all these all the pegs so they would fit in and come out a little bit easier. Wouldn't get stuck because once they were in, it was I had to break out the pocket knife to get them out.
Damn.
There's a lot of Jimmy and a prying.
Right.
But good solution. I wish that game would get up to more players because I find it intriguing that you have a betrayer, you have someone that's going to betray the group.
You don't know who it is.
You don't know who it is, and I would really like it because the game is it's very tilted in favor of the betrayer. For the haunts that I've played, it's been very difficult for the group to take him down.
So, I yes, but that's often the case, but it's very circumstantial.
Okay.
I've been betrayer a few times where I'm like, I'm doomed. They don't know I'm doomed, and that might save me, but I'm doomed.
Yeah.
And then there's been a few times where I'm like, oh, these guys are so gonna die. So I mean, it just depends, right? And then sometimes because each time you only get one half of the story, you may be a lot more boned than you think you are, not knowing that, oh, well, as it turns out, the betrayer has this, and I didn't know they had that. I shouldn't have gone to the room where they were at. Whoops. Or as the betrayer, you might be like, oh, they have a way they can destroy this. Funny how my side doesn't mention that at all. So you're out there using your doomsday machine, and they're like, I've got the MacGyver bubblegum.
Yeah, the special knife that can kill you immediately.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of. It's definitely very circumstantial, right? I don't want to say it definitely leans in the direction of the betrayer. It often does, but it could easily go either way. It just tends to go in the way of the betrayer.
Yeah, well, at least in a lower number. I've always played it with a very low number of players, maybe 3, maybe 4. And without a decent-sized army, especially some of the haunts where you have a boatload of monsters on the side of the betrayer that get added to the board, and the betrayer can control independently and everything else, then it gets very, very difficult for the team for the Scooby Gang to take down the monster.
Definitely can.
Yeah.
But then I've had several others where the players, if we'd had more of them, it would have been harder. Because every time one of them took a turn, something happened.
Okay.
So like the betrayer only had to, I think if they got 4 more turns, they died or something.
Okay.
But every time one of the not betrayer people took a turn, something bad happened to the players. So the more of them you had, the harder it would be for the betrayer to lose.
Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely, like I said, it could go either way. It's all going to be
It's a hardcore message at the end of the game, almost like the Friday the 13th Nintendo game, where if you lose the game, it just comes up with the mask and it just says all your friends are dead.
Yep, pretty much.
Yeah.
Well, there was one we did where, like, every time a player took a turn, they aged 10 years. And
how did that reflect in the game? What happened?
Your stats all got one worse.
Oh, okay.
And I think as soon as you hit the age that would make you over 80, you died.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty great. And the betrayer was getting younger every time, and so their stats were getting better.
That Benjamin Button,
yeah,
whatever it is.
kind of. They're like, I'm just gonna suck the life force out of all of you people I lured here for this express purpose. That I found out about 2 minutes ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, that. So
nice.
Yeah, I mean, there's some crazy stuff in that game. This to change gears and to talk more about funky dice. There's a game I've got called Formula Day. Are you familiar with this one at all?
No, I'm not.
You might.
You should know this by now that a good majority of the games will be. No, I'm not familiar with that, John.
And that's fine. I didn't expect you to be.
Again, I'm still very new to this.
Right, but this one's kind of in your wheelhouse of interest because it's a car race.
Okay.
So it's like, and you can do street racing on it. It's a board with two sides, but it's one side's street racing and the other side's like an actual like F1 race.
Okay.
And you use the way you play the game is you have a car and you have a driver, and you have your car has this little damage gauge, and braking too hard does damage to you, and downshifting using your gearbox to slow down damages your car. Taking turns too fast will damage your tires, and you have a gauge for each of these, and so you break them and you die. Is pretty much how it goes.
Okay.
But you can pit to get repairs if you play that long, but one lap is usually a half hour in this game.
Jeez.
Well, I mean, it's the way that it works is it's like this. You start off and you have a little four-sided die, and that's first gear. And so you have the option, I believe after the first turn, you can shift up gears at the beginning of your turn. And so you go up to second gear, which is like a six-sided die, and then third gear, which I think is like an 8 or a 10. And then by the time you get to fourth and fifth gear, you have like a 20-sided die, and the lowest number on it's 11. But here's the thing. When you get up to a turn, each turn has a little number, and that's how many times you have to stop within that turn in order to not skitter off and die. And so you have to like downshift coming into the turns, and you can take the lanes so that you actually, take a racing line through the turn in order to get the correct number of spaces to get the stops in. And yeah, I mean, it's a more complex than you might think die rolling racing game. And there's a lot of potential strategy to it. Like, okay, if I go into fifth here, then by the time I get to that turn, I'm going to have to downshift twice. So I should just stay in fourth, because if I roll really high, then I'm going to get to that turn really soon, and I'm going to want to be in third when I get to it, or I'm going to die horribly of death. And any turn that you don't make the requisite number of stops by more than one, you slide off the track and die.
I'm sensing there's a lot of death.
There
There's
can
a lot
be.
of dying.
It really depends on just how balls to the wall you're playing this racing game.
Yeah.
So if you're doing the street racing side, there's also all sorts of other little like threats. There's people that will throw stuff at the cars.
Nice.
There's a place where you can go past a police station, and the whoever goes past moving the fastest or something gets a bonus of nitro or something. It's weird. It's an interesting game. I've only played through it about 4 times because it's a long playthrough for something that's like 1 or 2 laps.
Yeah.
And most people it's very die based, and so it's, even if you're playing the strategy well, the dice can really ruin your day.
As with anything with dice.
Yeah, pretty much. So I'm not a super big fan, but it's an interesting playthrough. And this is another one. There's an episode of Tabletop about. I'm a big fan of that show. Go watch.
There's an episode of Tabletop with just about any game you want to play.
That's not true. I've got 3 of them here on the list that there's not an episode for.
Aha.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, but Formula Day, good times. Let's see. I got another one that goes to 8, and this one can be super complicated, but this was one of the first ones I played that was a everybody versus the board sort of game, and it's called Arkham Horror.
Okay, Batman based?
No.
No?
No.
Okay.
The other Arkham.
Okay.
This one's about Lovecraft.
Okay.
So the whole thing is it's the 20s, and the stars are right, and so one of the elder gods from Lovecraft horror is waking up and going to do what the elder gods do when they wake up, which is destroy the world, generally speaking.
Okay.
And you happen to be in the little town of Arkham, where weird things are happening. And you're trying to figure out, hey, everybody, you pick an investigator at the beginning of the game, and each of them is a little different. They all have a special ability, and they all have some little stat sliders, sort of like what you see in Betrayal.
Yeah.
And you wander around and you gather equipment and you kill otherworldly monsters, and then eventually you either seal up the gates to other universes that are opening up all across town, so that the Elder God can't come through them and devour the universe, or the Elder God wakes up and you have to fight the Elder God, which is generally not going to go well for you. I mean, it's not called an Elder God because you can just knock it over.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're generally bad times, but those can be super, super complicated games. Like, generally speaking, this is another one that you can play solo, but it scales to 8.
Interesting.
Yeah. Generally speaking, you've got somebody that's trying to go through and close portals. You've got somebody that's basically sweeping the streets for monsters. The way that each turn the board gets a phase called the Mythos phase, where the board does something, and sometimes it's actually something useful, like, hey, there's a planetary alignment, so all the spells cast until this card gets replaced cost 1 less sanity to cast, which is great. And then the next one will be something like, so there's a serial killer in this part of town. Anybody who ends their movement in this part of town, winds up in the hospital. Or you've got, as I said, you got stats, but 2 of them are health or stamina and sanity. You can't really die in this game most of the time. But generally speaking, if you run out of health or stamina, you wake up in the hospital with one stamina. If you lose your sanity, you wake up in the asylum with 1 sanity. And you can use like otherworldly magic, but it tends to cost you sanity. And you can fight the otherworldly monsters, but it tends to cost you stamina. And so, yeah, it's
may cost you a little, may cost you a lot.
It's
point is, it's going to cost you.
It's a eldritch horror version of Shadows over Camelot, really. Instead of it being a bunch of fronts with things like the Pictish army and the search for the Grail, it's fight otherworldly monsters and try to stop the Elder God. The ideas are the same. It's a little less harsh because I have actually won this game several times. And I've played it a lot. It's not for the faint in terms of game mechanics. There's a lot of moving parts. I would strongly suggest in the case of this one, if you're going to play it, get someone who's played it before to show you the ropes. Because the first time I played it with a bunch of people that had played it before, but they weren't playing it correctly. I'm like, it seems like this is running awfully long. This game should have murdered us hardcore by now. We were ignoring one of the little limit rules, like, hey, you can only have so many monsters in the streets before really, really bad things happen.
Yeah.
And we ignored that rule. So the game ran way, way long. And yeah, so I found that rule later, and I'm like, hey, guys, we've been doing this wrong. So the next time we played it, it was over very, very quickly because we were not accustomed to having to go through the streets with a shotgun and murder us some dudes. So...
Interesting. So, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm adding all these to the wish list as we continue.
Right. Arkham Horror, there's not a episode of Tabletop for, but there is one for Shadows over Camelot, Concept, Betrayal, and Formula Day.
Yeah, Concept is... I missed Concept. Okay, sorry.
Right.
We're getting to the end of this episode, too, so it's more like shopping list time, which is usually Kyle's job, but he's not here.
Fair enough. These are all games, as I said, that are intended for 6 or more players because a lot of people have trouble filling that particular gap.
Yeah.
So if you are in the market for one of these, make sure you pick something that's good for the people you tend to play most with. You don't want to pick something that's like super long and strategy heavy.
That's a solid range.
That should give you a fair number of options, right?
Concept seems like it's a very straightforward, pretty easy game. If you've done Pictionary, you've done charades.
For the most part, yeah.
Yeah, it seems like it's pretty easy to pick up.
And Codenames is in the same vein if you're more into something that doesn't require quite so much analysis.
Yeah, and then you've got you're all the way up to Shadows over Camelot, which seems to have a much more complicated mechanic behind it, and the same thing with Arkham Horror,
right?
Where it seems like you're gonna probably spend a little more time explaining it to somebody that hasn't engaged in something of that level before.
Well, those two you're going to run across a lot of text. One of the advantages of Seven Wonders is it's a lot more of your European style game.
Yep.
Where it's almost all icons.
Yeah.
So it's all pictures like you need one piece of cloth in order to do this thing. And it's all like you need one glass bottle in order to do this thing.
Yeah.
And so it's the names of the buildings are there, but the rest of it is all just pictographs for the most part.
Nice.
And so it's pretty intuitive about, okay, I don't really understand what this does. I'm pretty sure this is what it means. And there's a little handy little quick reference on the back of the roll. Is like, here's what all the symbols mean. So the one that's like shows the backs of 2 cards with a check mark means you can build 2. It's just very straightforward.
Yeah, it was straightforward. It took a little bit. I mean, when we played this game, you're talking to somebody that took great anger and rage when Google went away from words for things in Gmail to pictures of things that they didn't really look like the things that they were supposed to do.
Right.
So, yeah, like the first day they changed the icons, I'm looking for, how do I delete an email? Where's the delete button? Why did you take this away?
Right.
Words I can get very quickly. I'm now playing charades with something that doesn't change and doesn't really talk to me.
Yeah.
Well,
I get you.
Yeah. So there's that. But yeah, great games. I don't know. Do you have a spot you're going to? You're going to your store.
Eighth Dimension.
Eighth Dimension. I don't have a spot. I don't know if I'm going to go do anything for board game day, but everyone's going to be out doing it. Neil's going to be out doing something. I don't know if Kyle's going to be out doing something.
So games are expensive, folks. Get them on sale, right? If you're in the market for games at all, Saturday's a good day for it.
Yeah.
So just no two ways about it. And, get out, support your local neighborhood game shop.
And there's a lot of stores that have games on the shelf for you to play, intentionally for you to play.
Yes.
Eden Games and Humble is one of those stores.
Yeah, Eighth Dimension does the same thing. They have a room for this express purpose, and they have a giant rack of games. And you're like, hey, you want to try this one out before you buy it? We totally get that.
Yeah.
Go play the one in the back. We'll even show you how to play. We've done this before.
Yeah. And most of the stores that do this, their game collection of ready to go, play them off the shelf. It's the store's copy. Their collection of games is bigger than what they actually have on sale.
In a lot of cases,
Eden Games collection, their storefront is decently sized, but their collection, their racks of games to play in the store is massive.
Well, that's because they'll special order stuff in for you.
Yeah.
They're like, we can't keep this on the shelf. It just doesn't make sense. We don't sell enough of it. But nobody has it, and so we have a copy of it. If you want it, we'll order it for you.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason the neighborhood game shop survives at all is because of stuff like that. That and, comic book subscriptions and things of that nature. Like Eighth Dimension, my wife has a box there that she gets her comics in, and she's like, yeah, I need 88. That's mine. And they're like, all right, so here's your 2 gem comics.
Yeah. This is your locker.
Right. Yeah, pretty much, man.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like I said, get out there, support your friendly neighborhood game shop, get free swag if you're into that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then get stuff on sale. There's just no sense paying full retail. Even having to compete with Amazon. Amazon's not super cheap on a lot of these, so get them on sale.
Yes, it took me a long time to get a copy of the X-Men
Marvel Legendary.
The Marvel Legendary, yes,
Yeah.
the Marvel Legendary. It took me a while to get a copy of it that wasn't $55 or higher. It took a few months for Amazon to come down to that price, and I finally got a copy of it for $40. I think when all was said and done with taxes, $41.
Yeah. Well, they fluctuate. Keep your eyes peeled.
Yeah.
But definitely buy stuff on sale. There's just no way to do it.
The plug-in. What was the plug-in?
Camelizer.
Camelizer. Yes, I always forget about Camelizer. It didn't really give me the alert for Legendary though.
Interesting.
It dipped below my threshold and didn't alert me, and I just happened to be browsing Amazon and found it.
Interesting. I've had pretty good luck with it, but I haven't used it a whole hell of a lot. So maybe there's some buggy behavior in there. But I bet there's another app out there that does something similar.
Yeah.
In which case, leave a comment because I
Leave a
want
comment.
that information.
Let me know because we live in apps. John especially lives in apps.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
plugins and everything else to use for this purpose.
Damn right.
So, all right.
Paying full prices for chumps.
Automate everything.
Yes.
All right. Well, I think that's the end of our hour. Thanks for joining, and we'll see everybody on Tabletop Day.
Get out there, folks.